Good to see you guys. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming here. The first time at USC, or have you been here before?
I've been here before because Mike actually taught a class here.
Yeah.
And so
Tell me which class. I think I know what it would be.
It was digital DNA in the School of Cinematic Arts.
Is it with Diego?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Diego, I was co-professor for 3 years.
Has anyone taken Diego's class?
All right.
That's shocking. There's not more crossover because they're sort of. I think it's even on the same night. Isn't it on Wednesdays, or was it on Wednesdays?
It was on Wednesdays. Yeah.
Highly recommended, particularly if you like the DNA this class. It's one of those that we would love to have in Marshall, but it's in cinema. So you should take it. What did you? How long did you teach that?
For 3 years.
And did you do the grading yourself, or did someone else do that?
we gradually evolved to pass-fail, so it became easier. But I mean, I was definitely involved in the grading. No,
That's excellent.
Yeah.
You know, we're not allowed to do pass-fail because that would be something really attractive to us. But no, it's great to have you guys here. As Lawrence probably told you, the class is more about entrepreneurial mindset than actually the nuts and bolts, but we're going to cover both.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self, and what type of things could we give them that maybe they don't have to learn over the course of 20-something years?
Very similar to my former class.
There you go.
Yeah, very
there you go. There's the testimony for that one. So before we dive in, and we like to sort of cover your lives a little bit, the first question that would come to my mind, and probably a lot of people, I've had businesses with my sister, I've had businesses with friends, and some people will just say never, never go into business with your family and friends. There are advantages and disadvantages to it. Why has it worked for you, and what is your recommendation on going into business with family members? Go ahead.
I think, look, every family is unique, every partnership is unique, every co-founding relationship is unique. Even me and Danny as brothers, we're unique. We're 13 months apart. We grew up as best friends. We've experienced everything in life together. So, it's its own kind of special thing. So I would say your mileage may vary. But for Dan and I, it's worked incredibly well. I think, if I was going to sort of like classically kind of like walk through like some of the huge benefits, and then I'll say some of the things that we've had to like work on. Huge benefits is just like implicit trust. There's all in a co-founder relationship that can be, sometimes up for grabs, and with my brother, it's never up for grabs. Another huge benefit is we naturally spend a lot of time together, and so we enjoy spending time together. And you're gonna, in building a business with your co-founders, you're gonna spend a lot of time together, and so there's not many communication gaps that other co-founders might have. So those are some really good benefits, and just like deep understanding of one another and one another's strengths and things like that. I think just knowing the other person really, really well is really helpful. I think the things that you have to advice if you're considering going into business with a family member, I'd say is you have to work really, really hard to like try to unlearn the family dynamic and keep it out of the office, because it's very, you really have to think like, if this was another co-founder that wasn't my brother, how would I deal with that person? And when you're, kind of role modeling behavior for the rest of the company, at home I would call my brother, "You're an idiot," or something like that about something, but in the office it's not appropriate. So you really have to work hard to kind of unlearn that. But there's so many models of successful brothers who've done incredible things. I mean, the Disney brothers, the Wright brothers. I think if you have a sibling, and I would never, this has been the greatest experience of my life. So I feel like there's a lot of good things that can come out of it.
And in my situation, it was clearly my sister's company, and so it was clarity on it was her company. I was a minority owner, and our roles were clearly defined. In your case, you guys share a title and a role. How do you break ties, or do you not get to that place very often? And how does your skill set complement each other? Because that's another thing, is you don't want to have a person that brings the same things to the table as you do.
Sure. I think we've been fortunate enough that we haven't had like a huge disagreement in terms of vision for the company. So there hasn't been anything where it's been deadlock,
Right.
right? In that sense, and we do have mechanisms where we have like third parties who we discuss when we're working through issues, and that's really helped us. And it starts with something as simple as like coaches who we work through issues with, and like that forces us to discuss things. And oftentimes, I think that you find that if you feel like you're disagreeing, it's that you're not actually communicating in the right way about the topic. And when you elevate the level of communication, and there are a lot of people who can help you with those things, it sort of ferrets out the issues, and then you can sort of resolve the business disagreement. Right. So like that's one thing. And what was the second part of your question? So it was,
just how are roles different?
Sure. Like I think like it's evolved over time. Like I think as a generality, I work more on like the finance and ops side of the business, and Mike works on more the marketing and merchandising side of the business. But like we've both have heavy involvement in different parts, and I think often it leads to better outcomes because we have to then hash out a lot of decisions. And it's a fast-growing company, so as we're growing so quickly, I think there's just so much to do that like you're just happy that there's someone there to cover some ground, and that has also been helpful.
Yeah, and there's a threshold question in any company is whether you want partners or not, and so even sort of that part plus siblings, there are pluses and minuses. With a partner, one of you can take a vacation and know that someone's minding the store that has complete trust. The other thing about family is they don't typically quit on you and just leave. You've got that reliability that you just know that, like, even if we get into a disagreement, I had to learn this as a young person. If you disagree with somebody, I thought you're supposed to be mad at them until like someone apologizes. Like just to hold it against them and be fume about it. Whereas partner's just like, hey, we still having dinner? You still coming over? And you're like, wait, I'm sort of pissed at you. Like, no, you're not. Like it was what it was. So I think you guys, talking about the family dynamic and understanding that is important.
Yeah, and I think uniquely, like to your point about dinner, it's like we do this thing called Shabbat. Like on Friday nights, we go to our family's house. So like no matter what happened that week, we have to sort of go home, see our parents, talk to them, and like you have to kind of leave things at work, right? And so that like sort of forcing function where you have to have that switch. In a way, it benefits the business relationship because you can't stew or fester. You just have to sort of move on from the fact that I didn't like this decision, or you did that thing that like was annoying or whatever it was. You're like, okay, here are my parents, and like they'd be so disappointed if we're like fighting in front of them, and it's just like not worth seeing my mom be upset.
In fact, Lauren can attest to the fact that we were having a decent argument just coming before this class. We're trying to figure something out, so we're really wrestling with it. So, I mean, it happens all the time. I'd say. I think and I think, I've had other co-founders before, and I'd say it's a really bad sign if you're not having arguments with your co-founders. I think, getting at the right thing requires, real debate, real discussions, and you don't know what you don't know, and so you want someone who can kind of push you and test you and bring up possibilities.
Especially if you're that vested, where you guys care so deeply about the company or whatever the issue is, you're going to have firmly held beliefs. But you always have to be open to the possibility that you can be wrong, or that you've got an insight. Someone once described his management style, run an agency as like a loud family dinner. People get to voice their opinions, and we listen. But once we make a decision, everyone's on board and we go. Yeah. And it sounds like it's a good philosophy. Speaking of family. Where'd you grow up? Do you have other brothers and sisters, or is it the two of you? And then tell us a little bit about your parents, like what they do for occupations when you're younger.
Sure. I'll take it.
Just take turns.
Yeah, we'll rotate. It's just the two of us. We grew up here in LA. Grew up in Encino and a little bit in Westwood. We both live in West Hollywood now. My dad is an OBGYN. So there's a little bit of a family history in being in the service of women customers or patients. So I guess it runs in our DNA, and it's been natural to us. And we can talk about the route to this some other time. My mom's always been kind of super mom, and she's been full-time dedicated mom, and instilled in us a lot of our values and made us who we are today.
Did they have different opinions on what's a good career for their sons? Did one push you in one direction or encourage you in another direction, the other have other opinions, or were they sort of consistent on that?
I would say they were actually pretty consistent. they were both not really supportive of us becoming doctors. So that was like one thing, because my dad was a doctor, and they, everyone thinks like their job's the hardest in the world. So there's a little bit of that. And they were both like very adamant that we go get graduate degrees. And I think that comes from like this sort of immigrant mentality where like they had to leave their homes and they didn't have things that they could take with them, but they could carry their education. So that was like pretty ingrained in like and we both ended up going to law school. But beyond that, I think like they're like, go get your education, and then you have more flexibility in terms of what you want to do.
Well, 3 lawyers sitting up here. You guys both went to law school, great law schools, but decided not to practice. Tell us about that, or didn't practice for too long. I didn't.
No, I mean, I never practiced. I was studying for the bar when I decided I'm going to do away with that, and then just started working on the company. I think law school is good for if you guys are considering it. If you want to practice law, like, I highly encourage it. Outside of that, I'm not sure it's actually worth the time and investment, especially because you can learn so much working. Where I feel like I've grown the most and learned the most is in my own entrepreneurial endeavors. But like, if you get a job at a early stage startup or anywhere, you can learn a ton that you may not get that same experience from school. So I'm more of an advocate of, if you want to go be an entrepreneur in particular, start working early. Don't go for the graduate degree.
Yeah, I sort of said that before you came in. Like, if you want to be an entrepreneur, be an entrepreneur. There's no part-time entrepreneur. There's no, I'll be going to school and be an entrepreneur. You're certainly not going to be a founder of an active company. I got a lot out of practicing. I practiced 5 years at a firm called Latham & Watkins, and learned a lot. You said you learn more practicing, or you learn more by working than in law school than you ever in your 3 years. Law school is a blast. I don't know about you guys. Getting in is the hard part, and otherwise it's like studying. It's intellectually fun. Play a lot of intramurals, and then interview for jobs. But I would say the same thing almost that your parents say is like, think about that now. Like, you always want to have a skill, just in case. It's not bad to have a skill. Now, being an entrepreneur is a skill in and of itself. A traditional skill, medicine, accounting, law, all that stuff. You can always fall back on it. You didn't practice either?
Didn't practice.
So why did you want to go to law school? For the intramurals and the...
No, I think it was like, so I think we were at different points. So I went more or less straight out of school. And I was the firstborn son, so there was a lot of like pressure on me to like sort of go down more of like a traditional path. I think my dad's own experience was his dad sort of said, you have to become a doctor, and then all his brothers became doctors. And so he had that same sort of like, okay, well, go to law school. Like, what are you doing? Graduating, you have no grad degree. What are you, there's sort of just the traditional path, doctor, lawyer type thing. And doctor was out already. So that's why I ended up going. I felt like it was a little bit of inertia. And so having lived that experience, I wouldn't, promote it for other people.
And so take us back to after law school. You made a decision, or while you're studying for the bar, that this is not going to be your career. What did each of you go into in terms of careers or companies?
So it was actually, our sort of business paths collided at that point. So my brother had been running a digital agency. That was the sort of early roots of what ended up becoming FabFitFun. And so in 2010, when I was graduating from the bar, he was going back to law school. I was studying for the bar. I decided I was going to do it. He's like, well, why don't you come work on the agency and help run that agency? I started running the agency with Mike while he was at school. And then while we were running the agency, FabFitFun was actually an internal project of ours that we were starting as a newsletter and blog, developed it there. And then that sort of ended up taking over the entire company. So it was really born out of this initial concept of, are you guys familiar with like a Daily Candy or a Zoe Report or a Thrillist or any of these before your time, right? The Skim, anyone know the Skim? Okay, so the Skim is a modern day version of like something called Daily Candy, which was like an early daily newsletter where they just send you an email with like a little snippet. And it was like your best friend and talk to you about, the hot thing going on in your city. And these were like local newsletters. And we thought to ourselves, well, that's an interesting business. Let's replicate it. A couple years into that project, we were like, newsletters are not such great businesses. Let's do something else. And that's when we sort of pivoted and evolved the business into the subscription box, because we were a daily newsletter in sort of fashion, fitness, wellness, home, technology. We'd go to these media events where we'd get these swag bags. And we thought to ourselves, well, wouldn't it be cool if we take the sort of media type of things that we're covering all these products, and take that swag bag idea and deliver it to consumers. So we launched the initial FabFitFun box in spring of 2013 and sold out of the first 2,000 the first 2 days with like really 3 core points of differentiation. And tell me if this is too much, but the 3 core points of differentiation that we launched with were full-size products across lifestyle categories in a quarterly cadence. And we thought that there was enough of a novel concept because in the market at the time, there were like a lot of niche players in the subscription box space. You guys know like Birchbox or Loot Crate, or what's a food one, like HelloFresh, right? Everyone was focused on a certain vertical, but we thought, let's go across the whole lifestyle with an eye towards building a personalization platform. So we started with the lifestyle with that idea in mind. The other was full-size retail as opposed to like sample-size products, because if you're getting the box itself, you'd know that there's associated retail value. So when you get our FabFitFun box, you're paying $50, you're getting $200 to $400 in full-size products, and that's the price because that's how much they actually sell the products for on retail shelves. And the last is we had an eye towards building a membership that you could be for life. A lot of the subscription boxes at the time were really, really focused on like a monthly experience, and products were like piling up. But we're like, well, we want something where it could be something you remember for life. $200 a year, well, may feel expensive now, especially as a college student. For a lot of people, that's actually accessible. And when you dovetail that with the amount of value that you're getting in the box itself, you're paying say $200 a year, $180 if you pay for an annual membership, but you're getting over $1,000 typically. That's a pretty good deal. It's something that people can really wrap their heads around. So we launched that sort of flagship product with then an eye towards building a larger membership business that now that we've done with flash sales, content, community, all these other things that we've added into the overall membership.
And if you looked at that, you said that there was a precursor to that, and there was sort of more the social and the media part and the blog. When you looked at this, did you make a conscious decision that we want to be in the membership box business? And whenever you start a company, though, if you consult with people and you keep asking them, people will tell you why it can't work and all the companies that didn't make it. And certainly in that space, there are a lot of companies that didn't make it. Why were you convinced that you were onto something unique and special that was enduring? Or were you?
Well, I think at different times you're making different bets, and I think we placed an initial bet with the newsletter business, and it had some things that went well and some things that didn't go well. We were able to like find an audience, and we got a few 100,000 emails, but then we weren't really able to monetize it, and we didn't think the advertising landscape was going to be amenable to basically anyone who had an editorial team. You either had to be a solo like kind of person, influencer, or you had to be Facebook or Google, and we didn't want to be caught in the middle. So we're like, okay, we have an audience, we have a voice, but we don't have a business model. And I think that's where the box was frankly like one of several experiments. And I think that was really our DNA was more like we're going to keep experimenting, and then it's almost like it's kind of like Darwinian thing where ultimately the experiments keep evolving and until we got to something that had a lot of traction. The box was a very discreet bet, so I don't want to shortchange that. And we put a good amount of research into it. But when we launched it, we didn't know this was going to be it. Right. This was kind of like, it's a good bet. Let's and we got to place a bet, or else we're not going to be in business. So
it's a fascinating approach. I mean, everyone thinks I got to have the idea, it's got to be cemented, and I got to go. Your whole company is built on sort of like adaptive and flexibility.
I think
and
one of the biggest myths is the entrepreneurial myth of like, I saw this really clear vision, this really clear mission. I think it happens. Don't get me wrong, it happens. I think it's probably more often actually like a repeat entrepreneur who's had all the experience. Like an Elon Musk, I think he's been more intentional in his later businesses than in his initial ones. But you study the roots of like a Facebook and Uber. These were kind of like fun. They were just fun, playful kind of experiments. I mean, Uber. Travis was so uninterested in Uber that he didn't run it for the first year. He tweeted out, "I need a CEO for some project I have." And then later we have the stories of like, "Oh, I knew this, that, and whatever." And I think Facebook was born out of it was initially Face Mash, which was like this, find out who the hottest, most attractive woman in college was. And that, led to something. And they're like, okay, well, actually, now that we can pull the pictures in, we almost got kicked out of school for this. Why don't we try to like recreate literally what was at the time the college Facebook, which was at Harvard, it's like a roster of who's in your dorm. And let's put that online. And I think once you kind of like see it, then you can see more and more, and then you get to a place you're like, oh, this is the impact I'm having, and your vision, the mission start to coalesce, I think. But I don't think that has to be a prerequisite. I think you have to have some conviction that you have some skills, you have some knowledge, you have some insights, and that the world wants something that you're able to create. And I think that's a good enough starting point in my mind. And then over time, hopefully you're calibrating so that you're aiming really, really big.
And at the time that you were iterating and trying new things and making bets, were you just doing it with like your own money? Did you already take on an investor? Did they give you that type of flexibility to experiment?
Yeah, so the agency that Dan's describing was something I started with a group of friends in college. And so there you go.
You're good.
Yeah. And so we had some cash flows from the agency.
What are some of the other clients you guys served?
We had a litany of political clients. We worked with, our first client was actually Rudy Giuliani. He's now in the news again, but this is when he was running for president in 06, 07. At some point we pivoted from, someone said politics and Hollywood are basically the same thing. If you can do this for politicians, you can do this for celebrities. And that's when we picked up Rachel Zoe as a client. We worked with Samuel L. Jackson, Jennifer Garner, the American Music Awards, the Golden Globe Awards. And so there was a lot of like learning on other people's dimes, so to speak, because in client services you just charge a little bit more than it costs you to do the thing. And that was part of it. And then we had some savings that we ultimately put into the company as well, especially as we were kind of making that pivot from being a client services business to a enterprise value kind of building operation. And we ran very, very leanly. I mean, we until 2015, which is 2 years after we launched the boxes, we'd raised zero outside capital until 2019, last year. Until January of 2019, we had only raised $6.5 million in the history of the company. And that took us all the way to $300 million of top line revenue, which is where we landed around 2018 top line. And in Q1 of last year, we raised a much bigger round. We raised about a little over $100 million. And so, put the business on more sound footing to be more aggressive in a lot of different directions, and that's where we're at.
Are you on the finance side more, did you say?
Yeah.
So we'll ask some questions about the finance in a minute, but I want to just sort of keep talking about the business itself. So just take us through the first few years of growth, of when were there times where you're like, I'm not sure this is going to make it? And were there points where you're just like, we're on to something here?
I feel like for me, and Mike and I had like slightly different experiences, I'd say. I think when we launched the boxes, I felt like I knew we had a business, right? Because you don't usually sell out of your products in 2 days, right? And then the question was then, because like we're like, oh shit, we don't have a business, and now we have a business. Then there was just a question of how big does it become, right? And that's where like the iterations and the tweaks and things like that evolve it. And that's where like you go from as Mike said, you go from like a something that's like a little online college Facebook to something that becomes Facebook, right? Yeah, I would say like, when you get that initial consumer insight, and like one of the things you look for, like we've invested in like 50 companies. If they're growing fast, usually that's like a pretty good sign. And then everything else, then you because you're growing, then you have an opportunity to build a company. But if the growth is not there, then you may not have that opportunity.
And you mentioned sort of the swag bags as sort of the idea. Swag bags are generally, people contribute that for free to be in a celebrity bag. Tell us how your model worked and how it works now in terms of how you place and sort of pay for things.
Sure, yeah. And so like initially we got a lot of the products for free in exchange for placement in our newsletter. One of those, like, and like our first box has like a lot of like the early DNA of how we run the company now in it. Except now we pay for products because getting million plus units of a certain item is very hard for a brand to donate. But when you're getting 2,000 units, we're like, okay, we'll give you a dedicated blast, or we'll put an advertisement in our box, or we'll incorporate you into one of our events, or one of our friends had a bunch of excess inventory. We'll give you take the excess inventory off your hand in exchange for some other type of service. So that was beginning was extremely scrappy. And talking to PR folks, things like that. Actually, one of the first products, you guys heard of Moroccan hair oil? Yeah. So like that was like the big get. So like we actually had another friend who was working with us, and he was tasked with like, go get the best products, and specifically go get the oil, right? And so, and at the time in 2013, it was like the hottest beauty product, the hottest beauty brand. So he got the oil. We filled out the rest of the assortment with, various closeouts, various PR contributions, so on and so forth. And we said, sign up for FabFitFun, get, Moroccan hair oil, which sells for $50. When you buy this subscription for $40, and that was like the whole premise. Like, and we had the oil plus all these other things, and we're off and running. Procurement now is a little bit different. Like, there are many forms of how we get the products that go in the box. A lot of it is working with brand partners. Work with some of the best brands in the world. And then a lot of it is also our own creation. So we have a really robust product development team. We have a brand development team as well. So we create our own brands and our own products. And that's a big part of what we're doing. But we also create products for other brands. Actually, one of the things that's really unique and interesting about our business and point of differentiation is actually creating several million units of something is not so simple. And when we partner with even some of the biggest brands in the world, West Elm being an example, we actually made the product for West Elm that went on our box. Like, they contributed the IP, the tech specs, those types of things. But it was actually us who did the sourcing and the actual product development at the end of it. So lots of different flavors for how we get the products in the box. Often we're paying, cost more or less. And then there's some people who still use our platform as a vehicle for advertising. So for things that are more sample size in nature, they'll pay for placement.
Interesting. So the model's changed a little bit, especially with size. Do you still allow smaller businesses to participate, and is there a place for them?
Oh yeah, we work with tons of small businesses. As you can imagine, like, financing has become an issue when it gets to that scale. But because we have such a sterling reputation in the market, and we really have focused on being good to our vendors, there are a lot of financing options that they can turn to in order to help them finance the PO from FabFitFun.
So that's one of the challenges you'll have as a smaller business is you get an order for how many units?
Well, so it varies because one thing that people don't realize is that the box is highly customizable. So there could be almost infinite variations of the box now. And if you're an annual member, you actually get to pick 7 or 8 products every season. If you're a quarterly member, you get to pick 5 or 6. Because there's so many variations, now we break up the SKUs. But we have some products that are across all boxes, which is in the order of almost 2 million. And then we have others that could be as small as 100 or 200,000 units.
Okay. So it's interesting that they have financing probably available, because as a small business, the good news is you got an order for 1 million units. The tough news is you got an order for 1 million units, and it's a high concentration on one customer. So you always sort of have to worry about, is that financeable? It may not be financeable as a PO. It's probably more financeable as account receivable. And so it's interesting how customers, or vendors meet that challenge. What, you both have backgrounds in social media and effectiveness of advertising campaigns. What analytics and data are you watching really closely whenever a box goes out? What are the things that you really track to make sure, was this successful, not successful? What does the customer think? And how else are you engaging with your customer?
Yeah, there's a few metrics that really drive everything in our business. Probably number one above everything is retention, just how many people are actually staying on from one box to the next. Really closely to that is we're looking at our acquisition metrics, which how much does it cost us to acquire new members, and then how many members are we acquiring each day. It's a pretty good sign of whether we've released a good box or not is our new people coming in to join it. A little kind of more complexity beyond that, when we're looking at retention, our business now, as kind of Dan alluded to, it's not just the boxes, it's all these member sales and a bunch of other kind of things that members can spend money on. So we kind of develop a forecasted LTV model, which is LTV stands for lifetime value. So it's the expectation of how much we're going to make from any customer. We look at it on a contribution margin basis, so that's after all the costs. So the cost of the products, shipping, packaging, payment processing, fulfillment, customer service, AWS, anything that's variable, we take that out and we say what's left, and that's our contribution margin from an LTV perspective. And generally, we're trying to optimize for a very high ratio of contribution margin LTV to customer acquisition costs. The higher that ratio looks, the better we feel about our business, and then at the larger and larger scale. So there's
Explain that, because this is an introductory course with majors from across. You have cinema majors, you have music majors, and business majors. So talk about customer acquisition costs and how it relates to LTV.
Yeah. So this whole what I just kind of all those things I talked to, a lot of people would refer to them as the unit economics of a business. So when you're looking at financial income statements or balance sheets or things like that, you're just kind of looking at the aggregate of everything that's happening in the business during different time periods. When you're thinking about the unit economics, you're actually thinking of it from a customer level. So LTV is how much you make, what's the lifetime value of the customer to the business. Customer acquisition cost is we take all of the money we spend in advertising and then we divide that by the number of customers coming in, and that gives us our customer acquisition cost. And so the ratio of the LTV to customer acquisition cost, different people will kind of give you different bars to hit, but let's just say you want to be, let's say 3 to 1 or better, and you're in some sort of good territory. Is sort of a ballpark on it. And then there's other dynamics that we pay attention to. The unit economics give you an insight into the profitability of what one customer does for you. But ultimately, cash is king in a business, and so we do look at payback periods in terms of the timing of when we have to put money out, either from advertising or just to buy inventory or for any number of other reasons, and at what intervals we're actually collecting that cash. And we've made optimizations to make that metric even better for us. For example, we actually have created an annual plan that gets a lot of benefits, increased customization, earlier shipping, earlier access to our sales. And so now over a third of our members actually prepay for the service annually. And so there are things that we look at and saying, if these are the key metrics that drive the business, what else can we do operationally to improve those metrics?
You're one of the sort of most known and most successful businesses that started in LA in the last 10 years. What about being in LA is an advantage for you guys, if anything?
So I think LA is unique in its storytelling and creative culture. And in a lot of ways, the way we think about the products that we put in the boxes is around storytelling. So I think that DNA, working with influencers, creating a lot of the products, in and of itself is a huge advantage, being in LA. And so that's really where I think it stands out. It also helps that LA is a burgeoning tech scene. Like, when we were sort of getting involved, there was maybe one VC and 20 entrepreneurs, and you kind of knew them all. And there was a poker game of 30 people who are now more or less some of the more successful entrepreneurs in LA who are very, very well established. But now when I go to the startup events, I'm like, who are these people, right? And there's so many of them. So I think having that ecosystem is actually really, really beneficial if you want to build a company. I think still at the executive level, it's actually pretty complicated to find talent in LA, because the later stage companies don't necessarily have it. But in terms of eager, willing young people who want to start companies or join early stage companies, there's a plethora now, and it's become really beneficial from that regard as well.
But having multiple big companies out there really helps on that executive level, because people are coming here in general, and they're less concerned if this one doesn't work out, then I'll go to another one. So we just recruited a new chief marketing officer. So our CMO came to us from Netflix. 10 years ago, Netflix wouldn't have had their senior level marketing team here in LA, or a company like Netflix. And so there's there's a lot of benefits from just the growth of the ecosystem.
Says a lot about the company and and the maturity of the ecosystem that people are moving here, and that's a great hire from Netflix. Well, get ready in a couple of minutes. I'll turn to the students for questions. Let's talk mindset for a little bit. Before we do that, give us an idea of sort of where the future's heading for the company, and are you expanding beyond the categories that you've been? Is it product mix? Is it geographic reach? What are you and your partners pointing towards?
So, we really think about like the membership experience first, and that really breaks out into 3 different areas for us. One of those is like personalized commerce. So we have obviously our subscription box, highly personalized and customized, but we also have flash sales and traditional e-commerce that comprises about 35% of our revenue. And we also have a styling service that's akin to a Stitch Fix for members only. So, developing more commerce opportunities to shop, or working on travel and experiences, things of that nature. Then we have this concept of member engagement. So that really starts with like one-to-many goods, like in particular content and community, where we're creating, live television programming, a Reddit-style platform that sits behind the paywall, often looping that into commerce experiences. So we're launching a book club, where you tie together sort of an online curriculum, sell the book, some paraphernalia, and then have people meet up in local meetups that we're also facilitating, and sort of have a 360 experience where it's content, community, and commerce all together. And then the last is really around sort of taking our data and distribution and helping foster innovation. That really takes place mostly in the new brands that we're launching, but we're also leveraging sort of our platform to make investments in early stage companies, especially in the CPG space. We recently launched a brand with Ellen DeGeneres called Unhide, which is very focused on, faux fur. It's a faux fur brand, like, anti-fur brand, really. We started with a blanket. We're developing more products there. We invested in another company called Our Place, which is a direct-to-consumer kitchenware company. And really, I think these products and brands we're partnering up with because we think they could be accretive to our ecosystem. But we also think we can help them propel themselves as they go to market.
Your company was, I don't know if it was the idea first or the community and the trust that you built. So you got to be so careful, I guess, to make sure that whatever you're doing, that you don't infringe on that trust by doing something new. But I guess if the DNA of your company is innovative and experimental, and your members appreciate that, obviously you take that into account. Is there any concern about going into a place that doesn't make enough sense, or sort of is that part of the decision?
I think, at bigger and bigger scale, it's harder to innovate without, the bar goes up. So, the experiments have to have a little bit more meat behind them, because it's a lot of people and their the expectations of when we launched the boxes, we sold 2,000 boxes. Today, I mean, 2,000 is a slow day, right? So I do think that the bar on experimentation goes up, but I don't think the culture of experimentation goes anywhere. There's new things that we have to deal with. Actually, having a community is both wonderful because we get so many ideas from it's almost like a nonstop focus group where our members are just talking to us and telling us what they like, what they don't like, things like that. But then on the downside, they're talking to each other, so you can't put them into like clean experimental buckets.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I mean they'll why did that person get this and I got that, and things like that. Like, so we have to be really sensitive to that kind of shared experience. I think I do think that the best kind of technology oriented companies tend to have these kind of experimental kind of modes of operating. It's deep in a culture like Netflix or a Facebook or a Google or an Amazon, and so I don't think you can kind of reduce your commitment to it. You just have to figure out what does it take to run an experiment, and I think that's sort of how we look at it.
Excellent. So many of the people that come in here and share their stories, are wildly successful, both early stage growth, and so I don't want to gloss over how hard it is to be an entrepreneur. You've done it a few times, both of you, and some of them have worked out and some of them haven't, right? So how do you How do you balance a little bit, make sure that the business and that part doesn't take over every part of your life? How do you stay healthy? Is there a routine that you guys have individually to prevent yourselves from just really burnout and other things? And I'm not saying burnout in the sense of getting tired of doing it, but just it's an all-in consuming thing to own and start a business. So I just don't want to romanticize it for students. Give us an example maybe of some things that maybe you've sacrificed, maybe you've given up, or.
So I mean, I think it's a it's a tough question because I think it's really hard to find balance, especially when you're younger, and then I think you sort of learn. I've had moments where I've literally burnt out, where I'm like, oh wow, I can't really do that much for the next couple of weeks. I'm gonna just take it much slower, and you have to sort of be very, very attuned to your own level of how much you can tolerate, and not to get to that point. And I think the things that do help for me now is a consistent workout routine. Although sometimes you can't help but we're just working now, and when you're fundraising, it becomes all consuming, and sort of some of those things fall to the wayside. But having some habits, I have a boxing MMA fighter who comes to my house once or twice a week. We work out. Having that regular routine with him, super helpful. Sometimes when things are stressful, I'll also meditate. Use Spotify, just turn on a guided meditation, take 10 minutes. That helps. Having things that you're actually looking forward to that are not work related, always really important. Don't lose sight of that. Spend time with your family or friends, and realize that it is really, not to be cliche, but it's a marathon, not a race. Because we've been running this thing for 10 plus years. At some point you have to realize that your business is your business and your life is your life. And when you're starting, I would say you can't really make that distinction so much. But as you head down to year 5 and year 6 and year 7, you have to ask yourself, well, is it sustainable to keep doing that? And it's probably not. So you quickly then come to the rational conclusion that you have to also continue to have a life and pursue all those things that are sort of normal about enjoying your life. And
you've had successes and failures, and you talked about sort of when you start the company, your identity is so closely wrapped to it because it's the way it is when you're younger. How do you, in times when things don't go well or something fails, you were part of Beachment, were you? And I'm not saying that didn't go well.
It didn't.
Beachment raised $89 million, spent it all.
Yeah.
And what did you learn from that, and how did, I would say bounce back, but just how did you view that, setback, failure, whatever you want to call it, in its relation to, because look, you've got a bunch of young people here who have scored really well on tests and get really high grades and are used to succeeding, and almost, well, basically you guys were that too.
Yeah.
So how do you put those things in perspective and not make that your identity, that I failed or I'm a failure or that, I won't recover from this?
Yeah. Look, but I call Beachment was my business school. I actually dropped out of business school to focus on Beachment at that time. And I think you just have to look at it as a learning. I mean, I think there's no other way. And I mean, frankly, I learned quite a bit. I think a lot of it was actually a lot of the things that we got right in the early days of FabFitFun were things that we got wrong, throughout the experience, through the learnings of Beachment. Even a good chunk of our most critical early senior hires actually were ex-Beachment folks, and so I think the failure is inevitable, and I think even those big successes, I mean, it's just hard. It's you dig at it and you'll find that there were learnings along the way, and I think that's it. I mean, I think there's no other way to think about it other than what can I learn from it so that I can whatever I'm doing next is that much better.
Do you have anything you want to add?
About, I guess.
No, not about Beachman, but about, the failure is inevitable. It's sort of an interesting quote. I mean,
there's so many failures along the way, right? And so I think you just want to take everything as a learning opportunity, both your successes and your failures. It's hard not to take it personally. And I think, in fact, part of you, and this might not be advice everyone would agree with, I think you should examine your failures pretty critically And like,
You learn more from those than your success.
yeah, and exactly. And there's nothing wrong with taking failure, personally, like, and saying like, I don't actually want to do this failure again. Like it could be a motivator. Yeah, I think not letting it affect how you make decisions is slightly different than like not caring. Like you should care about the fact that you want to succeed.
Absolutely, especially when you're that committed. Again, if you're not committed, don't start the business, don't be part of it. But you're going to be committed and wrapped into it, so it's going to take its toll. One of the students sort of talked about not being tied to results. So you're tied to results, or not not caring or not getting too disappointed. You're going to be. You're human. You're going to take it hard, but not forever. There's sort of that period where you sort of understand it, you reflect on it, you learn from it, but you will learn 10x from your failures than you will from your successes. Go ahead, Daniel.
I'd say it's almost like, don't take it's almost weird to tell people not to take their failures personally.
Right.
Like it's, of course, like,
But it doesn't define who you are,
Yeah, it
who
doesn't-
you will
doesn't
be.
mean-
It doesn't
yeah.
mean you can't make another bet, all of that.
That's exactly right.
So that's
Yeah.
just like, a lot of people personalize failure as I am,
Yeah.
as opposed to the business didn't work,
Yeah,
here's
totally.
why we made some mistakes. And by the way, if you fail as an entrepreneur, you probably get backed again. A lot of people would almost rather see somebody who's tried some things, failed, than hasn't done anything yet. And I'm not saying that's the determining factor. Speaking of that, you guys are angel investors. What do you look for in a business, and what do you look for in the entrepreneur, the leading entrepreneur?
I think since I'll preface this that we've done some late stage, and I think late stage we'll take a look a lot more at some some of the numbers. But I think early stage, I think it's a lot about the founder, a feeling like this person's not going to give up, that they can speak in with some unique insight. I always like what do they kind of know that is unique to them, and what do they know or what are they uniquely capable of doing? Because every entrepreneur story is something that's like no one else has figured how to do that, right? And so you kind of I'm kind of looking for that. I mean, there's other characteristics. I think just I do think that in some way you're always selling as an entrepreneur, and so that person being able to communicate and convey their ideas and what they're doing, that's really, really important. So I try not to do it for them.
Right.
I think sometimes you can kind of like it's almost like if you are an entrepreneur, one of the risks when you're angel investing is that you're kind of projecting. What would you do, or if you took that space or whatever. But I think that person is going to be not only they're pitching you, they're pitching co-founders, employees, future investors, press, customer, everything. And so their ability to kind of convey what they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it. And then also, look, I just at a really practical level, I look at angel investing partially as like a financial thing, and then partially as it's a lot of my education. I learn a lot by investing, and so I want to have relationships with the founders. I want to I go towards my interest areas a lot, and there may be a great company that I'm just not interested in the field or the area or whatever, and I think that's increasingly important to me. Time is precious, and you just want to do the things and be around the things that are just exciting and interesting.
Absolutely.
I mean, for me, I have to like the idea. I think that's a big part of it. Like how big are they thinking? What do they see as the real opportunity? What unique insight they have, which sort of dovetails with what Mike said. And then the other is how fast they're iterating. Like I think, often you meet someone, you have an initial conversation, and then you have a conversation like a week or two later or 3 weeks later, and you want to see like what their progress was in that situation. Like what were the things they were talking to you about then? And then the next time you had a conversation, and maybe the third time you have a conversation, and you find that like the people who are uniquely good entrepreneurs have moved on very quickly to a whole new set of challenges within a very, very short time frame. So like if they're like, hey, I want to raise money, and then like 2 or 3 weeks later, the ones who are good are like, hey, sorry, I raised money and like I can't talk to you anymore. And so like that's what I found. Or like I was having this issue, and they're like, oh, what happened to that issue? It's like, oh yeah, we figured it out. And so how quickly are they problem solving?
And so implicit in some of this advice is that fundraising, takes a lot of time, not just the amount of hours, but it's relationship based. Typically, you don't meet strangers and get an investment quickly. So you want to build these relationships up over time, even before you need the money. So if you were, thinking in 6 months or a year, I'm going to need money, you'd start meeting with people now or earlier and let them know, here's what I'm planning to do. And to Daniel's point, these are the things I hope to accomplish in 6 months. And then you report back to Daniel in 3 months and you say, I told you that would take a year or 6 months. Oh, we figured those out in 3 months. And he wants to see that. It takes time to build these relationships.
And I can add, sometimes it's good to, as you get more mature as a company, you give ranges, you give more projections, you give yourself more flexibility, which is a good piece of advice in general when you're talking to people about your goals. Don't set the expectations too high, though obviously appear ambitious. I've had conversations with people 4 or 5 years ago, and they take notes in those meetings. And now that I know what's going on, and I had no idea then, I'm I asked them, what did the note say? Because I'm actually genuinely curious as to what I had said in those meetings early on with investors, and then you circle back. So there's always a little bit of you don't know what you don't know, and it doesn't matter then. But as you become more of a mature company, it becomes a lot more about hitting plan, financial goals, what you said. It becomes increasingly important to do what you say what you're going to do. And even early on, I think that the investors you meet with, they really look at that. So if you're going to say something, and I think that's one of the things that that helped us along the way, is every time we talk to the next set of people, they'd always oh yeah, those guys, they do what they say they're going to do, and that's very rare. And so that's something I'd advise is do what you say you're going to do, and you'll probably land in a pretty good spot.
And as they did, if you need money to exist or to fuel your next step, you got to raise money. But the later you can raise money, the more milestones you can hit, the more achievements, the more profitable you can get, the more of your company that you'll hold on, and the more you'll dictate terms than people dictating to you. I'm sure there was a line for them to subscribe or to invest in them, and they can be very choosy and align themselves with the best investors in the world. You don't have that luxury sort of early on, but they had already a proven model that was profitable, and they needed growth capital. Well, not growth capital, but really. All right, questions from students. You got the mic?
So my question is, what made you guys decide to just make this a box or a company focused on women as a consumer? So what has stopped you in the past from opening up a box for men? Is the market there, or is that something that's in the works?
I think so. Some of it is just the history of how we got it off the ground. We'd built this site for Rachel Zoe. When we built our own editorial brand, we understood how to do lifestyle for women, and so that's where and it was a kind of side project, right? That's where FabFitFun began, and so that's where we started. And then I think why continue and not diverge, I think, is just a question of focus. We ultimately want to do things for men, and we currently have some experiments going on. We actually have a men's box that our women customers can buy for their husband, their dad, their son, their brother, their friend, and it does quite well. But to meaningfully launch a subscription and market it towards men and build a whole membership around that, it's just a whole other ball of wax. And we've been approached by many people to launch a different version of what we're currently doing. And you always kind of think is it going to be easier to launch something new and get an incremental whatever, and the next million members on FabFitFun, or the first million members on something new and different? And that incremental member has so far proven to us to be easier to go after. And so as long as that's true, we want to kind of stay in this zone and make the most of it.
I admitted a fact that you have a third co-founder.
We have a third co-founder.
What is her name and what is her
So Katie was she is the editor-in-chief of the box, so she actually heads our merchandising department, and she's been with us from the outset.
Hi. So I had a quick question about you guys being brothers. So did you guys think, or first of all, do you guys have similar interests which enabled you guys to work more collaboratively in terms of starting a business? And also, do you guys think that because you're brothers that you feel more free and less judged to express feelings with each other's and thoughts, which actually led to a greater chance of the company succeeding because you're free to talk without being judged and that sort of idea?
So I think people a lot of people talk about not having overlapping skill sets as being like the most important thing, but I do think that that's actually wrong. I think the number one factor in a successful partnership is trust. And so, it's something that would sort of, and the similarity and trust actually. And those are two things that I think lead to like a longevity of a relationship, because there's a lot of ups and downs in building a business. And to the extent that like you're more similar to someone you're building a business with, and you trust them, I think it helps you work through those issues. Does that answer your question, or is it?
Yeah, but like just like the whole like topic of like the whole idea of being brothers, like do you feel like besides the trust part, because like I feel like for the most part that would be something that's there, but just the ideas that you guys have in terms of your passions or hobbies or what you guys like, do you guys feel like you're complete opposites, or you guys are the same?
I mean, we share a lot of interests, but I think it is more about common values. And like how do we want to treat employees? How do we want to treat partners? Like these are things that like if you growing up in the same household, usually they're going to be more alike. But if you're not in the same household or don't have a long-standing relationship with someone, then you may have more dissimilarities on those fronts. And as more complicated issues arise, then you would have more disagreements. Right. But because like we grew up in the same way, same parents, same values, like a lot of times, and like we will have some disagreements about things, and often be like just who's a little more close to the issue will have a different view of someone who's a little further away. And that's when you have to like explain things and walk them through. And that's why communication is really important. But I think having those common values means that like more often than not, you're going to have a baseline of agreement as opposed to one that's very, very different.
Thanks so much for coming in. So about ancillary experiences, you spoke a little bit about like the physical experiences, like the book club, where your community meets like in person. And then I know you've also done like some digital experiences like AR stuff or like the TV programming that you spoke about. So what do you think is more engaging to the community, or like what works better, the physical ones or like the digital experiences?
Oh, well, look, anytime you can get people together in person, it's certainly more engaging. But it's a lot harder and it's a lot less scalable, and so I think that's kind of, if you were going to think of it as a trade-off, that's some of the trade-off. We have data that shows that people who go to a FabFitFun meetup spend a lot more money with us, but very, very few people relative to the scale of the business kind of go to the meetup. And then what does it take to actually go and scale something like that? It's a lot. So I think. It's not to say you shouldn't think about doing things in the physical world. It's just I think there's a reason that the software the software-based businesses kind of have such crazy values, and they scale so much because software scales really elegantly, and there aren't that many examples of tech companies that engage with the real world. But when you do and you get it right, that's incredible. I mean, Amazon's a great example of that, where they're applying technology to physical, real-world stuff. It's just you have to be really patient. I think Amazon is a 25-year story at this point. I think people were like, it happened so it didn't happen quick, and it was largely kind of derided for most of its history as kind of like an embarrassment and an inevitable failure and all these things. And so they went through a lot before they finally got to this place where it's like all of a sudden it's like, wait, they're the most important company in the world. So I think it's just hard to deal with the physical world.
First, thank you guys for coming. Second, what is the process of choosing what goes in the box, and how does one get their product with you guys?
If it looks good on Dan, it goes in the box.
Yeah, that's it. It's really simple. I was actually our first fit model.
Does swimwear go on you too? Bikinis?
Honestly, I did try some tights at a certain point because they said it was one size fits all, and I was like, is it really? And it was uncomfortable one size fits all, I'll say that at the very least. I think there's a lot of different elements of what goes in the box. A lot of it has to do with surveying and sampling our customers. So we'll send out consumer insights surveys around different box curations where we'll get overall box ratings on the assortment, and it'll sort of map it out in the same way that we'll map it out on the website. and also get individual ratings for each products. And so what you do is you end up doing some analysis where it's like this box versus this box, and there's just maybe one different variation on one product in this one, and then you sort of figure out, okay, between this product and this product, which one is better. And so there's a lot of that type of thing. But there's a lot of like consumer insight work and trend work that goes into sort of assessing what we think is going to be popular in the future, and then developing against that roadmap as well. So it's a little bit of art and a little bit of science mashed together. And then it's also based on like what we can source, right? Like often like convincing brands, like, and initially, it was hard to convince brands to say, like, come in our box. Like, you're going to be selling your products for 50. Like, it was essentially a discount. But now, because they realize that it's like this marketing supernova where, not only is it going in the hands of millions of customers, they're getting consumer insight work back because we actually share back a lot of the survey data to the customer, from the customer to the brand. And then, like, all these influencers are posting about the boxes, talking about the products. That ends up helping us sell. So it's sort of opened up the door of the number of brands that we actually do work with.
In your experience, do you find investing in advertising and marketing more beneficial, or in like product design / quality? Or in other words, you mentioned a couple of celebrities that have hopped onto your brand. Would you find those people more beneficial to acquire customers, or sort of like to expand your product choices and such?
Look, I think if you can build a product that kind of spreads on its own, I think that would be awesome. I think it's there are a few products that are really amenable to that, and most often they tend to be free ad-supported products or have some sort of freemium model. I think generally speaking, when people are having to pull out their credit card in order to convince them to do so, you're probably gonna have to convince them to do so, and so. You have to think a lot about, advertising or paid marketing. What I'd say is, a different way to kind of answer your question is, there are a lot of great products that don't lead to much success, and so I think distribution is extremely important. Arguably, it's actually more important now, whether that's paid media or some sort of viral hook or some sort of whatever, something that actually gets people to pay attention to it. You can't not pay attention to that side of the question. And that doesn't mean you can't have a great product. If you don't have a great product, then it doesn't matter. You can tell everyone in the world it's not going to work. So I think it's not kind of an either or, it's kind of a both. And then with the distribution side of it, there's nothing wrong with paid marketing. If the numbers work, great. In some ways, there's something healthy about the fact that if you can prove that you can sustainably spend money and make more in return, that's a really great thing. There's some companies that I've seen that they actually have a huge organic kind of growth, but then they didn't build that muscle and how to expand beyond that, and then they kind of get trapped in this sort of local maximum. So I think either one way or another, you got to figure out how to spread the word about your product, and that's really, really critical. And whether that's through paid advertising or some other format, it's important.
So you've mentioned a lot of different aspects to FabFitFun, the subscription model, the sales, some other things that you guys are going into. Is there an exit strategy? Like, what is the end goal? Is there an end goal?
I think you want to, everyone's end goal is to build a company that like withstands the test of time. So hopefully, once Mike and I are long gone, and we're still very young, so that's a long, long way away, hopefully like a generational company, but that people are finding value and is creating meaning in the world, and consumers are driving a lot of joy from it. I think you always have to be cognizant of your opportunities, and you have to look around like the competitive landscape and say, do we really have something that's sustainable and defensible and durable? How differentiated are we? And think about opportunities to monetize over time, because those are few and far between, and a lot of people build companies and they never do realize that experience, and things change and they miss the opportunity. So you have to keep your eye on it. You have to think about like an exit strategy, but for us, hopefully it's more that we're compounding for many, many, many years is the ideal sort of long-term plan.
Thank you for coming and speaking today. What was the process of adding digital community and social experiences like? Did you face any challenges, and how did you make that decision?
So to the point of the kind of experimental nature of the company, our chief product officer and our chief technology officer went away one weekend, and they came back and they said, we launched this community thing. And so, we had spoken about it. We had an idea that like people were talking about FabFitFun on all these different forums. Our chief product officer worked with me at Beachmint, and there we did some experiments around community, and we're really encouraged by it. And the fact that we didn't own our community in some proper sense was one of kind of our big regrets. So it came out of kind of a weekend experiment, and it started off really small, but over the time it's become a pretty significant kind of like engagement thing for our members, and we think it's a big differentiator for us too.
So, like, basically talking about, like, the gender spectrum, would you guys ever consider to make a customizable box that would be more, like, neutral and not designated to just women, but also to people who can't necessarily, people who, like, identify them as not women?
So, I mean, I think our brand positioning right now is extremely female in nature, but our long-term vision is to be a personalization platform. So it's regardless of, what your gender is, you're able to get a curated box that, fits what you want.
Okay.
So, even now we actually have men who sign up for the platform,
Okay.
and, they get mad that we've gotten feedback when we send emails that say, hey, ladies, like, hey, I'm actually a guy who signed up for this box, and because they find value in, say 6 or 7 of the products that go in the box as opposed to maybe all 10.
Okay.
The answer is yes.
And then for, like, marketing as well, would you guys consider to have men on your platform or someone who would identify themselves as a female for advertisements?
Yeah, we do. I mean, I think we with all things, we actually, I'll say this, we don't actually ask you your gender
Okay.
in FabFitFun. It's not part of the experience. I think our approach towards marketing has also been very experimental, and kind of we try a lot of different things, and then whatever's working, we kind of try to double down on it. And I think it'd be a really interesting experiment for us to run. I think so far we've thought about it from almost like, and this is a conversation we've had, actually Dan and I have had, which is if we want to get more men, there's kind of 2 paths. One is do something that feels like branded more, conventionally masculine, and that's sort of the experimentation we're doing with the men's box, quote unquote, right? With that our women customers are buying, or our existing customers are buying. And the other is actually what Dan was just saying, which is we've created so many options within the platform, and you see it on the screen, it says the most customizable box ever. Dan and I love our boxes. Like when I say if it looks good on Dan, I'm kind of joking, but the reality is, in any given box, we love, I'd say 75-80% of the products and can use them ourselves. So I think we're inching towards that. I think, and you raised a really great question, which was like maybe if we did some marketing experiments on it, maybe we would attract more people who are on different parts of the gender spectrum or identify in different ways. I think it's an interesting question for us to look at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you guys mentioned this earlier, but like without sticking each of your personalities in a box, you mentioned that the skills have like a cross section, right? How'd you guys determine your roles? Was it like a tactical thing? Was it organic? Was it because you were brothers? And that's including your other partner, Rachel? I think that's Kate. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So I think it's historically, it's a good question. It's historically evolved, and it's always kind of like changing a little bit. Like, I think at some point we're both involved in a lot of different elements of the business, but like, we need to fundraise. So someone go focus on fundraising, and just kind of like, Dan, you're speaking to these people, and then sort of evolved into to talking to more people and then went down that path. So I spent more of my time there. Mike had like a really, really robust background and experience in customer acquisition and marketing, from his time at Differentiation, but also from his time as running a digital agency, because they were buying ads for other people. So he really focused on like our marketing and our growth. So I think, it's a good question. I think we've talked often about like what, maybe you can go work on this for a while, I'll go work on this, and it's an ongoing conversation, because as the business evolve, the needs evolve. But what you find is like it's less about like what you're managing, because you end up hiring executives who really, if they're good enough, are just handling that function, and you have to meet with them once a week, once every other week, hopefully even less at some point if they're really, really good. And then you're just, hey, I want to spend my time working on this new initiative or focus my area on this. So like one area that I'm spending a lot of time now on is like our product and brand development and like developing our new brands. And Mike's spends time in a ton of areas, but he's working a lot on like the digital membership and what that looks like. So it's just an ongoing evolution is how I describe it.
Hello. So I wanted to ask, do you as a company get involved in political or social situations in relation to women, like the Me Too movement or the defunding of Planned Parenthood? And if not, do you think that you have that responsibility as a company that serves and profits from women and their experience to stay informed and get involved?
So we very much get involved in, I'd say, social issues, and we actually feature a nonprofit every single season. And it's something that we're really proud of. We've worked with incredible nonprofits from UNICEF to I Am That Girl. We're about to partner in the spring. We haven't announced it. Don't share everything with Dress for Success. And so that's definitely a part of it. We have made the decision, at least I'd say on a high level, that we don't politicize FabFitFun. And that's really in response to what we think our customers are looking for when they come to us. I think a lot of people are looking for a lot of different things from different types of brands. What we've found is that FabFitFun represents to our members, most of them, or at least the people that are there now, a place for self-care and a place for people to connect over how to be the best version of themselves. And at least right now, overly charged political kind of topics or the political climate can get in the way of the productive connections that people are having in our community around that. And so that's been the way that we've operated so far. We've to the extent that we've had small experiments where we've seen, and we do a lot of consumer insights. We've tried different social media posting, et cetera. We're taking our cues from our customers to make sure that we're creating the type of environment that they're expecting and they're looking for. Yeah.
Hey guys, love your brand. Great job with all of this.
Thank you.
So one of the things that's awesome, but also a little frustrating about seeing all these cool entrepreneurship opportunities in Los Angeles is that while I know you guys are here, like it's tough to get involved in companies directly, being a student. So I guess my question is, if you were a student and you wanted to get a job in maybe a young company, how would you go about reaching out other than just like cold emailing people?
Look, I'm gonna. I don't know, Dave. If you have,
go for it.
So this is a high bar that I'm going to say, but just find a way to be valuable to that person. And I think that's like, it's going to be very different for any specific company, but I think that's kind of the trick, right? When I actually in the class that I was running, this was like part of what we'd help the students try to figure out, which is like, they had to create a project which was some sort of output, some sort of creative endeavor or effort or something like that. And oftentimes it was just making something on spec for, a video or something like that for another company. And I think, I think when you're in college, developing your skills so that you have some skills, whether they're design skills or programming skills or sales skills or PowerPoint skills or whatever it is, right? and then finding a way to make yourself valuable to someone is really kind of like the critical thing. And it doesn't have to be to the founder, to the CEO. It could be to someone else in that company. But if, you know, I think good companies are well attuned to like sucking up value where they can find it. And, you know, I think, you know, it's not going to be one answer. You know, I think, but if someone had, you know, found a way to send to someone on our marketing team something that was really like a helpful way to like, this is how you're going to get all of the USC students to sign up for FabFitFun, you know, we'd pay attention. So if anyone has that idea, you know, and wants to put some free work into it. Yeah.
By the way, like, I assume you're growing. You know, you've taken on venture capital. They're going to be growing. And you're going to hear this over and over again. Find a way. Right now, you probably don't have to make a bunch of money. You're a student. Your time's not worth that much. Yeah, because you don't have that much experience. So find a way to do something, not just get noticed for the sake of getting noticing, but to add so much value that they can't ignore you. And that may be just shadowing someone, interning, learning their job, or something, whatever superpower, super skill you're developing, that has a use for somebody. So and it may be just your overarching interest in their industry that you've been following for 5 years because this is what you do. Find something that connects you, and then figure out how to.
Yeah, look, I'll give you my quick story of my when I was in college. I was the editorial chair of the Harvard Crimson, and so I was very involved in the school newspaper. And then I built out all of their first forums and blogs and things like that at a time where they didn't exist. And so I developed that kind of skill set. And a friend of mine had met a person at a conference that was held on campus, who then became an advisor to Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign. When that advisor asked my friend, hey, do you know anyone who could help us build a website to announce Rudy's running for president? My friend said, hey, Mike, I know you know how to do this stuff. Will you help me with it? And so, you know, that became my calling card, right? And that, you know, you kind of like, how do you define yourself in such a way, or build some sort of ability to deliver value in some way initially, early on, and then it can go in a lot of directions from there. But I think you got to find a way to make yourself valuable to someone. And I think that it's right. If you want to have an entrepreneurial career, you're gonna have to like you're gonna suffer on the like financial level early on, for sure. It's probably like that's an expectation that you should have. Like your friends who are going into finance or management consulting or, you know, a bunch of other things are going to make more money than you, and it's going to feel like you're behind them. I think that's just par for the course, I'd say.
By the way,
Yeah.
does cold
Yeah.
does cold emailing not work, or?
I mean, like, it just tends to have a pretty low response rate. I was wondering if maybe there's some, like, you'd go to a network event, or you'd, like, call their assistant and then get their contact in a sort of a...
I think that's like, you know, general hustling. Like, you get to someone however you can get to them. It could be LinkedIn. You could literally DM them, right? And, you know, you'd be surprised how many people actually do respond to that type of thing. And, like, you know, I think Mike and I, we probably get a lot of inbound email now, to the point where it's just like hard to manage. But like you know, early on, like I got like an email from a USC kid. His name's James Kabushani, and I don't know if anyone knows James.
James Kabushani.
Yeah, do you know?
It's spoken in class.
Okay, so James sent me like he spoke here. Okay, so James sent me a cold email saying like, really nice, like I admire all your accomplishments in the community, like I'm so impressed. If I could just spend like 15 minutes of time with you, like getting coffee. I'm like, this guy has no clue what he's talking about. I'm on the second story of a strip mall and we have termites, you know. And I was like, I would love to sit down with this guy who, like, you know, I don't know what's going on over there, like, you know. And so like that sort of, you know, I think he probably sent that email to maybe 100 people, right? But like from my perspective, I was like, all right, whatever, USC kid, I've never got an email like that before. Like, let me have him over by the office. Let me see what this guy's all about. So like that started like just to give you like you know, sort of that sort of hustle, because like that guy's a hustler. Like it comes through very quickly. You know, he emailed me and I was like, yeah, like I'm not sure if there's anything I can do with you right now, but you should go talk to this guy like Diego Broukhim. He's teaching this class at like USC or whatever it is. And then he like emails Diego Broukhim. I just met with Daniel Broukhim. Like he says I should definitely talk to you. And then Diego then puts him in touch with this guy. You should go talk to this guy, Troy, right? And like he starts his company, right? And so I think like widen the funnel is what I would tell you. And so don't get too focused on like this one person that you need to meet with, but like send 100 emails, right? Highly personalized, highly customized, and then don't, obviously like, and the approach, like it could be DM for this person, it could be LinkedIn. Like people do respond and they generally want to help. And if they're not helping, like this is where I'd say like, don't take failure personally. If someone doesn't respond to you, like people are busy, right? So like if you didn't, like this probably applies to like a life lesson, is like don't take like a lack of response too personally, or like a non-response or whatever it is. Like sometimes you just have to like, send that extra text, like, ping, like, hey, just wanted to touch base here. Like, I know you must be extremely busy. Like, do you have like 15 minutes to like hop on a call or grab a coffee or whatever it is? So I think like that persistence in that element, especially when you're not necessarily getting a response or you haven't heard back, is super valuable. And then don't limit yourself to one mechanism.
Can I take Mike? Great advice. And so James Kabushani was a student at USC who designed a viral ad for Tesla without being asked. And Elon Musk saw it, and it went viral, and it was extremely popular. So he came with Troy Carter because he built this relationship with Troy Carter. Yeah. You have so much access right now. You've got, immunity. You're a student. You're not, threatening to anybody. You've got the USC network. You've got the people that come through here. And again, you're not going to get to talk to the CEO of all these companies. You don't want to give anybody homework. These guys have enough work. And what will happen is it'll drop off their screen. It will drop off their text, whatever it is. It's just because they're busy. And so it's up to you to follow up and say, hey, I want to put this back up to the top. Don't ask them to call you. Don't give them any homework. I will follow up with you in 2 days. I will call you and keep trying. They actually like, not that you bug the crap out of them, but that you're diligent. We got a friend who you may meet, Steve McKeever. While he was at Harvard Law School, he went there to meet Stevie Wonder. He's I'm going to Harvard Law School to meet Stevie Wonder. He ran the Harvard Law Forum, found out it was nothing there, and he reinvigorated. Well, he wrote Stevie Wonder an invitation to speak at the Harvard Law Forum, and got nothing, finally got a decline. Well, once he got a decline, it was the happiest moment of his life because he had an address and a telephone number. So for 5 months, from November to March, he called the office every day. And he knew the secretary's birthday, name, kids, everything. And it became a running joke that the kid from Harvard's calling. He'll come and tell you that not only did Stevie Wonder come to Harvard and give the most emotional, powerful talk and concert ever, he's now the godfather of Steve's kids, and they produced him at Motown. Like, it's led to this entire life. Unbelievable things happen. It's introduced him to Obama, produced Obama. I mean, this series of events. James Kabushani. There are people in this class who dreamed of meeting Mark Burnett and now work on Survivor. You've got everything in front of you right now.
It doesn't hurt to ask either, right? Like, you got to ask.
Yeah. Shyness is not rewarded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say I will probably open an email that says, I got 20 USC students to join FabFitFun, and I can get 2,000 more. So if anyone wants to figure that out.
Right. And listening to any of these talks, what's a large challenge in your company? Because every company starts with solving a problem. Well, they all have problems. And maybe you're not going to solve the biggest one as a student sitting in the class, but maybe you're going to solve a small one. By the way, every company wants to, how do we improve engagement? How do we more effectively spend our social media? How do we reach young people if that's their target market? So you've got value just being in this market and being a consumer at USC, so realize that. Let's thank Daniel and Michael Broukhim.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.